All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Rooted in Data, Smart Tree Care at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm Rachel Bowers, planner in the university's Office of Planning, Design, and Construction, and the office's representative on the Campus Tree Care Committee. A few quick kind of housekeeping items before we get started. There will be time at the end for a Q&A. Please keep track of your questions sort of as the presentation is going on, or if you want, you can put them in the chat, and Sam will keep a running list of them. And when we get to the end, whoever made it to the chat first will start there and move on. Really quickly, before I turn it over to our amazing guest speaker this afternoon, I just wanted to provide some background on trees here at the university. The University of Pittsburgh has around 3,000 trees on its Oakland campus. These trees are spread across approximately 147 acres of land with around 100 different species. And the trees that we have range anywhere from trees as young as 3 years old to trees as old as 80 years old. Our campus trees are maintained by the Grounds Department, which is a division of the Office of Facilities Management. When it comes to trees, groundkeepers are trained to visually inspect trees on a daily basis. If they see something concerning, the protocol is that they notify the ground manager, who usually comes out and further inspects the trees. At that point, grounds either completes the work needed to correct the issues, or it's determined that a certified arborist is needed to come in to further investigate concerns. When an arborist is on campus, they will inspect the tree visually and provide a report of their findings to grounds, which is usually accompanied by a list of best management practices that are up to but not limited to either pruning limbs on the trees, soil remediation, treatments, and for control of pests and diseases, and in some cases, unfortunately, removal of the tree. Within the last year, the university has started working with an arborist who uses advanced testing and cutting-edge diagnostic methods to assess the interior health of the tree, which is beyond the visual assessments that are standard practice. And luckily for us today, she is our guest speaker. So I am very happy to introduce Leigh Pavlichko, the owner of Boss Keach Tree Service. Leigh is an ISA certified arborist, an ISA certified urban forester and municipal arborist, as well as a tree risk assessment qualified professional. Her company provides consulting and risk evaluation services in addition to a variety of tree care and maintenance services. And her goal is to bring science-driven approaches to tree care and long-term management strategies to help to balance the overall health of trees, the public safety, and community and environmental value. So please give a warm welcome to Leigh.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Rachel and Sam. I appreciate the warm welcome. I can't actually see anybody, so I'm not so sure how many people are here, but I'm really glad you guys all came. We definitely have a lot going on Pitt campus with the trees these days, as I'm sure you've all seen. First of all, I would really like to say that it really is a privilege to be able to be on the campus and be able to help with the tree care, to help the rest of the team. The rest of the Pitt team is really committed to a high level of tree care. Unfortunately, like Rachel had mentioned, this means that sometimes we have some removals. And I know a lot of you guys are really concerned about some of the larger trees that we've removed recently, and completely rightfully so. I would just really like to maybe dispel any negative ideas you have about what we're doing, or if there's any questions I can answer to help you understand how and why we're doing the things we're doing. I'm really excited to be able to do that today. So overall, I would like to start by, give me a moment here as I get my stuff situated. Today's presentation, I'm essentially going to touch base on some tree preservation, a method that trees use to heal themselves, although you'll understand soon that they don't really heal. It's called CODIT, and that stands for compartmentalization of decay in trees. We will do the basics of like tree trunk anatomy, and we're going to obviously then get into sonic tomography, and we're going to discuss some of the pathogens that are involved in the decay and what we're looking at in the images ultimately. Let's see here. So initially, I would really like to discuss preservation in an urban environment. There are a lot of challenges that come with that. It's definitely not the same as if it were just your woods trees or your tree out in your front yard. There are a lot more challenges that come up against an urban tree. Pitt's canopy goals, the lifespan of your average urban tree, and tree damage, and ultimately tree decline. So obviously, there are a lot of benefits to urban trees, as we all know. We all love to sit under the trees. We like to sit in the shade. They filter the air we breathe. They help with water management. There is a lot we get out of them. There have been a lot of studies done that show that the green infrastructure, particularly the increase in urban environment canopy, can reduce stress, improve healing. It can reduce driver frustration and aggression. It reduces domestic violence and can shorten healing times. There's temperature regulation, like I mentioned, which can reduce energy costs. And trees support a wide range of habitats. So it supports biodiversity, and it supports local ecosystems. So in reality, maintaining as many trees as we can is ultimately the goal in mind. And now with that, we know that safety is also very important. Sure, especially after this last weekend, everyone's really aware of the damage that trees can cause if they're not properly cared for, or if there's some like underlying decay issues that we didn't know about previously. You know about pretty fast after the storms. But I would just like to say that like I said, at Pitt, I'm trying to help support their goal of preserving as many trees as possible. And Pitt has been rolling out a range of efforts across the grounds and sustainability teams to plant as many new trees as possible. And I've been lucky to be involved in helping plan the future care for these trees. This includes irrigation, proper nutrition, as Rachel mentioned, proper care for the soil. This includes soil testing to make sure things are kind of balanced out for them and things like that. And we really want each of the new trees to be a very long-lasting addition to Pitt's campus. So as a lot of you know, the Cathedral of Learning was built in the 20s, and a handful, at least at this point, of the trees that you see on campus or that had been removed recently were planted shortly after the construction took place. And so this means that a lot of these trees had like an impressively long lifespan in an urban environment, because a good example is like a red oak can live between 75 and 100 years given the absolute like best conditions in an urban environment. And that's typically not in the heart of a city. That's, we've still got some green space around it. You don't have a lot of people walking around, things like that. But based on the literature, there have been meta-analyses done, and a study assessments of trees, specifically in Philadelphia, but in other cities as well, they found that the mean life expectancy of urban trees actually ranges from 19 to 28 years. So that is the overall lifespan for the majority of urban trees, when combined. So that's not a particularly long time. So realistically, the trees definitely have the odds stacked against them. Um, and despite what we want to believe, all trees do have an end point of their lifespan. Now, some are longer than others, but eventually they will die. So, every tree is going to reach a point where the increasing physiological demands for essential materials just can no longer be satisfied, basically. And this is the point where the growth slows down. And unfortunately, even relatively minor stressors or damage can initiate dieback, which is when, these trees that you once looked at were super full of foliage and they look beautiful. But as the years go on, you notice they're kind of looking a little scragglier, a little thinner. And unfortunately, once that takes place, you have a higher risk for some structural failure, to take place, limb loss, things like that. So is in an urban environment, some of the things that these trees really have going against them is, if you look in the picture, you can see the weed whacker damage at the base of that little tree. It doesn't have any mulch ring around it. As a matter of fact, the grass that is sitting around it looks as though maybe it had some pesticide sprayed or herbicide to kill the grass, maybe, instead of, having a proper ring around it. The damage caused on that small tree will be a lifelong problem and probably ultimately will lead in the early death of that tree. It's unfortunate, but when you've removed that much of the living cambium, which is right underneath the bark, there is unfortunately nothing that a tree can do to really completely heal over that. And if it does manage to heal over it, it takes so long that some type of pathogen or pest usually gets in there. And it's kind of like when you get some kind of pest directly internal, as opposed to it just like bumping into your skin and having some protection. It has a lot harder of a time to do it, once it's been infiltrated into the central parts of the tree. Another example of things that urban trees have going against them, and I'm sure you've seen this in your residential areas as well, is this poor tree that has been pruned to little bits. So I'll discuss a little bit later the compartmentalization of decay, but basically trees only have a certain type of wood that can callus over or close up, the way like a scar would for us, in certain parts of the tree, in the tree anatomy. And cutting the trees to what's known as stub cuts, like you see there on the right, the far right, is essentially like cutting your arm in half and expecting it to just kind of like heal over and grow another hand. It's just not possible. And trees don't have the ability to heal at all in the central part like that when you cut it like that on the branches. So realistically, what ends up happening is it just kind of dries out. The tree will sprout new sprouts and actually may even look very full in the following seasons. And you will think, oh, look, it's recovered and it looks beautiful, and that's great. But from that point on, the tree will actually be in a steady decline. Pruning a tree like that is basically a death sentence, and it's just a matter of time. Any number of pathogens are going to get inside of the tree now, and it is going to desperately try to recover with water sprouts. These are these little branches you'll see popping out everywhere, also known as epicormic growth. It is basically the tree's last ditch effort to get as much leaf coverage and photosynthesis as it can to make up for all of the loss of foliage and limbs. So yeah, these are some of the things, unfortunately, that urban trees really have going against them. But like I said, Pitt is working really hard to establish tree care plans that are making sure these trees have mulch rings, that are making sure they're not being pruned improperly. They're even making sure all of the grounds people are aware of these things and are practicing proper pruning practices, which is really great. Um, so here is just an example of some things that take place during like construction and things like that. It is really important to put up a construction barrier around trees, and it really needs to be much larger than we're often seeing them. Well far out past the drip line. The drip line is if you're looking at the top of the tree from the very ends, dripping down to the ground. This is everything from below that line is going to have really important structural and absorbing roots. And when you compact those roots with equipment and actually even heavy foot traffic over a long period of time, you start restricting the oxygen. You need to have pockets in the soil of air. And that ultimately you'll restrict nutrients, the ability to absorb water and nutrients. When you pile soil or mulch up against the trunk of a tree at the base, you're basically just introducing decay right there. It needs to have a nice root flare. You need to see some of the roots at the base. The tree is going to continue for years to put on more girth at the base in order to support itself structurally as it grows, and as it continues to get more branches and more leaves, so that it's more stable. So and they've scraped the bark there. That happens a lot. Mechanical damage from construction vehicles and things like that. These are all basically just a death sentence for these trees. So this is another thing that urban trees have going against them. And what you don't see is all the time is you don't see this part of it. What you see more times than not is the end of the project, and they've removed the dirt, and maybe they have put a mulch ring around it, and they've planted some perennials or annuals around it, and it looks great. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, the tree looks amazing. They saved it and they didn't kill it. And then they find 5 years down the road, the tree's in heavy decline as a result of this action. And actually, if you never saw that it had construction around it, you wouldn't know that there was ever a problem, and you would just be wondering what happened to the tree and why does it look so bad. But oftentimes by that point, there's not a lot that can be done to save the tree. So with that in mind, I do want to move on a little bit and talk about CODIT, which is the compartmentalization of decay in trees. And like I've said, trees don't heal, but what they do is create barriers within the structure, the trunk itself. They make something called wound wood. And I just want to talk again about how to reduce avoidable injury and why that's really important for tree healthcare. So if you look at the slide on the left, this is actually a snippet from a book by Dr. Alex Shigo, and he is known as the father of modern arboriculture. He is like the go-to for this. He spent a lot of time researching and developing these concepts, and it's really very interesting. It can be kind of complex, but the basic idea is that, like I said, trees don't heal. They initiate a process known as CODIT, and when a tree is wounded, it activates a set of biological defenses designed to like limit the spread of decay, because it can't stop the spread of decay. So It will limit the spots and protect the living tissue that hasn't been damaged. So most of these defenses take the form of like internal chemical-based walls that slow or restrict the movement of pathogens through the wood. These chemical barriers are part of the tree's natural compartmentalization process to help isolate the injured area from the healthy tissues. So as you'll see here, you have the four walls, and like I said, it's kind of hard to understand just from looking at a picture. But essentially, as soon as something breaches the cambium or even through the root system, because there's cambium, there's tissue all through the root system, um, it will start sending out chemicals. It will start plugging up the vascular system to stop, any type of fungus or anything like that. And then it will continue all the way to, the fourth wall, which is actually new wood that will separate them. And in trees that have successfully compartmentalized an invader that is not extremely aggressive, the tree may have this infection for a lifetime, but not exhibit any problems. But you can see it when you're pruning, and you prune things off, and you can actually look inside of the wood in the cross section, and you can see a section that is being confined and is being constantly like kept in check as the tree continues to put on growth around it. So it is essentially, the goal is to outgrow the decay. It can't heal the decay, it can't get rid of the decay. It will try to keep it in one spot and outgrow it so that it puts on enough strength to deal with any loss that takes place there. So when you make a proper pruning cut, if you look on the right-hand side here, you will see it's called ribbing. You'll see the wood kind of closing up over it. When you make a stub cut, or say you cut this branch off 6 inches out, it cannot heal over that. But what you might see, if it's a very vigorous tree, is it will start trying to close over that branch. And you will begin to see it can sometimes go as far as even to like pucker into that dead spot. Because what it's really trying to do is push off that dead part so it can completely close. So sometimes you can go up and you can reach it and you can pop that dead part off because it is really trying to push it off. But all it's really able to do, it's not able to heal. When you damage a tree, what looks like healing is not healing. It's compartmentalization. So to prevent anything from getting into that central part of the cut, it's going to grow over it and it's going to seal up. And when pruning is done in the winter, during the dormant period, when they are done, some trees can handle pruning, light pruning, all through the summer. Oaks, we do not want to do that, but a lot of trees can. And when you do it at the proper place at the proper time, you really limit any infection from getting in. So if you do this in the winter, when no bugs are present, when fungal activity is low, the tree has time to start healing over that, to dry out that cut before anything can gain access to the inside of the tree. And once that heals up and closes over, it's like it never happened for the most part. Any damage that was done is compartmentalized within that wound, and the tree continues to grow and be happy and healthy. Let's see here. So now I'm going to give you essentially like the bare basics, the bare bones of trunk wood anatomy. And this is going to be a precursor so you can really see what we're looking at when we're looking at the cross sections of the tomography, the visual, data that we get from the tomography. I'm going to touch base a little bit about the pathogenic fungi and stress on a tree, and ultimately the use of tomography at Pitt. So in these pictures, you can see, and it's essentially the same photo. They just say slightly different things, but I really like the one that showed the tree trunk there. Um, the sapwood of the tree is essentially your outer ring. So the greens that you're seeing there, and even sometimes into that darker orange on the left picture. The yellow part in the center is heartwood. Heartwood is non-living tissue. There is essentially a cellular timer on those cells, and at some point the tree decides they're done. They just kind of stay for structural support in the center. There's nothing living. There's no vascular systems within that anymore. That's functioning. Um, the sapwood is where the majority of the strength and the flexibility of the tree is found when we're talking about structural integrity. The sapwood is the living tissue. This is where it transports water. This is how it transports sugar. Um, Everything moves through this vascular tissue along the outside there. Um, and unfortunately, that is exactly how a lot of pathogens make their way up a tree. And one of the biggest things we see the urban in the urban landscape is a lot of times we have a large tree. A good example of this is more recently the log cabin oak. And the log cabin oak, once we had run the data on it and the tomography, it had a very large, we call them fruiting bodies. Everyone else calls them mushrooms, but we call them that because a mushroom just kind of is talking about one singular portion. Like, oh, look at that little mushroom. A fruiting body signifies just the tip of the iceberg of a much larger organism that is often all at that point when we're talking about trees, all through the roots, oftentimes making its way up into the trunk. So the log cabin tree, I don't know exactly how long ago, but within the last 15 or 20 years, if you were to walk from the sidewalk from the street, there was a little sidewalk that kind of went around and kind of stopped. So you could look at the log cabin. The log cabin that was put there in the 80s. So that was another potential problem for that oak tree. Whatever construction took place in the 80s to make space to build that log cabin, because it was a relocated log cabin that was put there, um, most definitely had an impact on the roots of the tree. But more specifically, I believe we use some of our technology. It's called arboratics, and it's a lot like the tomography. However, we get a view of kind of the root system. Um, Now, I don't talk about this a whole lot only because the arboratics information I would not use by itself. This is used in conjunction with a lot of other information, using the tomography, using the resi drill, which I'll discuss. However, in conjunction with the resi drill and the tomography and using the arboratics to map the roots, it was pretty obvious that some major structural roots were cut into in order to lay the foundation for that cement, that concrete walkway. So I would assume it was at that point that the tree became infected with a fungal infection. In this case, it's known as like oak bracket. Um, However, that particular fungus can take 15 to 20 years before you even notice fruiting bodies or mushrooms, which is the sexual reproductive organ of the mushroom itself. And you may, particularly in red oaks, you may never see canopy loss. You may never notice, oh, this tree looks really terrible. Um, Oaks are very good at making it work. Um, but unfortunately, the root system was almost non-existent in that tree. So you'll see in later slides how this plays out long term. Um, but what you end up with is a tree that is very, very heavy on the top, keeps putting out a lot of new foliage in order to compensate for the damage it perceives. And what you really have is a tree that's made itself a giant wind sail. And during these windstorms that we have now more than ever, these trees will just blow over. And you don't have any warning and you didn't see any problems. And so this is where tomography and being able to see what's happening inside of the tree in conjunction with the other diagnostic criteria we're using. This is really where the technology shines. A lot of the trees that have been removed recently at Pitt were being monitored for some for several seasons and some for years, and had been looked at by several uh, certified arborists who all kind of came to the same conclusion ultimately. So these big removals were not, this wasn't taken lightly. This wasn't just, we're just going to kind of take this down. We've decided it's too big or whatever the reason is. There was a lot of extensive monitoring and testing that was done to make sure that this was the right choice ultimately for these trees. And let me see here. So that is the anatomy of the trunk. Here you can see, much like I was discussing with that oak tree, you'll actually, if you start looking around, you can notice this in your residential areas. You can notice this in the urban environment as well. A healthy tree obviously is really good at, it's very efficient at, absorbing water, getting nutrients. It has a lot of reserves for that. It stores these, sugars and everything in the root system. Super efficient at making the systems work. Once the tree is stressed, it is significantly harder for it to even bring water all the way up to the top. And unfortunately, a lot of urban trees are stressed. So this sometimes goes on for many, 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 many years before anybody even notices. And by the time somebody notices, usually it's too late to do anything about it. So a healthy tree is exposed to any number of like pathogenic fungi, bacteria, things like that in its life, and it doesn't have any problems. But stress trees, unfortunately, just don't have the same strength to fight off the infections as a healthy tree does. So when the tree is under pressure, whether it's from drought or root damage or pests or poor growing conditions, it ultimately its natural defense systems slow down, and makes it much easier for diseases and decay organisms to get a foothold. And healthy trees can allocate resources towards defense compounds and wound response and new growth, whereas stress trees divert that energy toward basic survival. And it leaves like far fewer resources for the chemical defenses or the compartmentalization. And that's why the minor injuries or the routine pathogens become a real serious problem for a tree that's already struggling. Okay, so here is a good example. I think when a lot of people hear mushrooms at the base of the tree, they're expecting, the cute little umbrella mushrooms or, something to that effect. Here is a really good example of some fruiting bodies at the base of a tree um, that maybe you wouldn't recognize as a problem. You might just see it and think it's, I don't know, animal scat maybe, or someone spilled something. Um, so most fungi, well, I can't say most, but a lot of pathogenic fungi reside in the butt and the roots. So the root system obviously is below, and even some of what you see up top, but the butt is, right above the ground there at the ground level and just above. And when we see a fruiting body from any of these um, from any number of these more serious fungal infections, you're able to say, well, this is typically a root and butt rot problem. So we go in and say we get our tomography out and we're looking at stuff and we can see, a good couple feet up into the trunk area that we have decay, like significant decay. This is a serious problem because once the fungal infection and once this pathogen is done consuming roots, there's nothing left there or not much left there. And it's done kind of consuming the base of the tree. It's now moving up into the tree. So if it has moved up into the tree, we have a significant problem. And there is a very high likelihood that you're going to have a tree failure. And I can say in the near future, but really it can just happen at any time. You have too much rain, too much wind, too much drought, and the tree just can't handle this stress. But this is a really good example of showing that the tree may look fine to you. You may think it looks fine, but unless you know what to look for around the base of the tree, um, you know, you might not be looking for the right stuff. Okay, so now to all this stuff everyone wants to hear about is the tomography, how it uses sound waves, how arborists began using it. I'll talk a little bit about our Resi drill and a program we use called ArboStop. So, in the 1960s, that is how the use of tomography began. And it was actually used to test the strength of utility poles. And basically, a hammer sends a wave through the pole to a sensor on the other side, and it measures how long it takes that sound wave to arrive. Fast travel equals strong, stiff wood. Slow travel is weaker wood or internal problems. And this works really good for utility poles because the sound moves along the grain in a straight path. In the 90s, people started trying the same idea on standing trees to look for internal decay. But trees are round and irregular and full of natural variation. So when you measure across the trunk instead of along the grain, the sound doesn't travel in a simple straight line anymore. And that makes the old method like significantly less accurate. In 1999, the first tomograph was developed by RIN Technologies, and this is the company that we've got our tomography machine off of. We are actually able to communicate directly with the RIN brothers, the people who created this. They created ArborStop as well, the app I'll mention to you. But if I really, really wanted to, now it might take a few weeks, but if I really wanted to, I can send some of this data, say I have a tree and I don't know what to think of it, or I think it looks terrible, but someone really wants to keep it, or vice versa, or however you want to go about this. I can even send this technology, the data directly to Frank Rinn, who developed this technology himself, and get a response. So that's pretty cool. They are still very active in making all kinds of neat stuff. They have lots of information online, YouTube videos and things. So anyway, the physics for using it on a standing tree are the same. However, the interpretation is different. So the tool measures the time of flight, or how long the stress wave takes, like I mentioned, from one sensor to the other. But the software here, we're using multiple sensors. So the software here uses all the times that it has perceived to build a map of what's inside the trunk. So when the wood is solid, the sound wave travels mostly in a straight line to the sensors. And when there's decay or cavity, if you look in the picture there on the left-hand side, the second circle that has ABC, when there is decay, the sound wave literally has to make a detour around it in order to continue its flight to any of the sensors. So obviously, as you can see, if you have only 4 sensors, you only have a couple ways that these sound waves are going to go. But when you have 12 or so sensors, it's testing from every time you tap one of them, it's sending it to all the other ones. So in the end, what you end up with is, basically an internal map of the trunk. And when the only challenge with this is there's no way to know exactly which path the wave took. You only know the straight line distance between the sensors and the time it took for the wave to arrive. So if the wave took a longer path, the calculated speed will look slower. And so the tomograph uses slower than expected times to infer where the wood is damaged and how extensive the decay might be. So you tap a hammer, sound wave travels through the wood, and the sensors measure how long it takes to arrive. The longer the travel times, it means the wave had to go around decay. The software uses all of these times to create an internal picture of the trunk. So as you can see on the right-hand side here, we've got some conchs, little shelf mushrooms there. And to what most people would just look like little mushrooms. Why would you take down this big tree? I barely see anything, or those are so small. I can pick them off. A lot of people will pick them off and say, see, well, I've picked it off and now it's fine. It's not fine because that was just simply the flower, if you will, of the entire organism. It's still there. It will produce those again. Sometimes you can see these mushrooms each year. They will put on new ones and the old ones will look brown and sometimes not even noticeable. So let's say the environment wasn't favorable that season to put out a new mushroom, but you just have that old rotten one that you can still see. That just still, you still have an active infection. It just wasn't able to put out a new flower this season. So we're also looking for things that don't look like that. So it's much smaller and much less significant looking. But as you'll see from up in the right of that picture, the decay is this is basically a cross section. If you were to cut the tree down just above those mushrooms and look down, this is what you would be looking at. And this is all of the internal decay inside of the tree. And what is more important than, the red indicates really significant decay. And more times than not, when we see red and pink, it's just hollow. There is no wood there. But what's important is, like I discussed earlier, the sapwood, which gives the tree its bend, its flex. It also is where it gets its nutrients up and down through the tree. This has a significant amount of sapwood decay. So the structural integrity of the tree is compromised. The fact that this type of decay is high enough up in the tree where we're testing it that you can see it, says there's significant root damage. And now you just have a higher likelihood of failure. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. Now here is a picture of a tree we did remove at Pitt, and you can see it's pretty much spot on for what we were seeing in the tomograph there. And some of what isn't really what you really kind of can't tell from the picture, it's hard to tell unless you're touching it. Outside of that, so first of all, you have the central portion of it that's decayed and it's hollow. Well, that went all the way down into the roots. So it kind of like went like the bottom of a wine glass and continued to hollow out, where we really need to have structural roots and not an empty space. But with that, as the tree was bending and flexing, what you can see radiating from that central decay, stress fractures. So this tree was really not compensating too well with the damage. All around where you see darker wood just outside of that circle, this was all wood that you can just kind of you can stick like a pencil in, you can stick anything in it, it will stick right in. It's very soft, it's very mushy. And ultimately this was a tree that had a fungal infection called Pseudoinonotus dryadius, and it's super common in oak trees. It's the most important root killing pathogen of large oaks in the urban environment. So a lot of the structural roots were compromised by the time this was removed. Now, this tree in particular, we knew it was advanced as well because it had significant canopy dieback. So a lot of the branches were gone. And with, again, the winds that we have nowadays, unfortunately, we have no way of knowing exactly when it's going to fall over. But what we do know is it's not going to recover from this. This is just a matter of time. So you can also see, if you look on the right, you will see numbers along the outside of the ring. One says 10%, one says negative 13%, negative 12%. So what this program actually shows us too is the strength loss on each side of the tree. So let's say you were in a residential area and you were worried about a tree. It's really close to your house. You didn't notice any problems with the tree, but you're concerned about it. You wanted to have it tested. So we can actually determine the strength loss of the tree and which direction it's most likely to fall in. So, negative 13% strength loss doesn't sound like a lot. It is significant, however. But what's really concerning is a 30 or 40% strength loss. So if you have a 30 or 40% strength loss on one side, you've got a pretty good predictor of which way that tree is going to fall. This also takes into account if you know which direction your wind comes from or your weather, generally speaking. So if you know all your strength losses on one side and you know all your weather comes from that side, you have a pretty good idea of where this tree is going to fall. So that's another interesting bit of information we can get from the program there. So here are just some more pictures of, here is a European beech on the left. And it, let's see here. If you, much like I was saying with the tree that we just looked at, what looks like sound wood to a lot of people is not sound wood at all. And on the left picture, you can even see down on like the right side, the difference between that lighter wood and the more reddish, normal looking wood. That is coated in action. That is the tree putting up its wall of defense and attempting to, kind of keep that inside there. But as you see on the right, the corresponding tomography that took place showed exactly what we're looking at there. So this is really accurate technology, realistically. Um, and then on the right side, here's another one that had very small fruiting bodies at the base. Most people wouldn't have thought much of it, but obviously the damage was very extensive once the tree was removed. Um, and the tree was really trying hard. You can see some of the rounded spots, the ribbing, the wound wood trying to grow around it. But unfortunately, this pathogen is way faster than the tree is able to compensate for it. Um, so that's what we're seeing there. Okay, well, here's a good one now. This is a happy one. We have we were asked a few weeks ago to check out the Chancellor's ginkgo, which is like several hundred years old. It's a beautiful tree. However, there is a lot of concerning external decay, extending several feet up at various places at the base of the tree. So Pitt just wanted to be sure that there wasn't anything to be concerned about. So as you see, we place our sensors, 12 sensors around the tree. That is sensor, if you look between sensor 6 and 7 and the corresponding data on the right side, you will see the tiniest bit of yellow. And that is the extent. I mean, 9 and 10 between sensors 9 and 10 had a tiny bit too. But the picture we're looking at between 6 and 7, you can see the tiniest bit. Other than that, this tree is perfectly healthy. Ginkgos are also known as living fossils. They're very good at compartmentalization. But here you can see that there was a lot of concern about the tree. Without knowing what's going on inside of the tree, you're way more likely to be like, we're getting rid of it. We can't risk it. It's right next to this beautiful, historic home. There's a street right near it. But essentially, no, we tested it. And it's in great condition. We actually tested it in 2 separate spots to be sure. And the testing was conclusive and it's beautiful. So preservation will continue for many years to come for that one. Here is another example of a tree that if you were just looking at it in your yard, you might not notice there was any problem. It had leaves. A lot of people tell us it had leaves. It was beautiful. It flowered in the spring and it was beautiful. And then it fell over and destroyed my house. And as you can see, there are no roots left. I mean, this tree was just literally standing there as if someone had stuck it in the ground. So these are the concerns we're trying to address at Pitt. And in an urban environment and with these older trees, this is a very real concern. Here's another picture of a very similar thing. Again, these have a lot more mushrooms, but you might not have known what you were looking at. I know people who say, oh, I had those, they grew outside of the trunk for years. But eventually it will fail. They will win. So another thing we use the tomography for is some of whether we determine whether or not we're going to remove a tree is based on the client's threshold for, what their threshold of danger is there. We're looking to see what, if they're really trying to preserve it, this is very important to them. If the tree isn't by their home, and or if it is, I mean, it's up to them, but typically if it's not by their home or of anything important, what's known as like valuable targets, we can run tomography on it. And let's say we don't see any fruiting bodies, but we notice decay inside of the tree. We can set that tree to monitor it. And this is what we're doing with some of the trees at Pitt. And you basically test it every year for the next coming years. And you're looking to see if the tree is outgrowing the decay. If it's putting on sound wood at a greater speed than the decay is taking hold, then that tree can be set for preservation. I mean, that is 100% a viable option. So that's also what we're using the technology for at Pitt. And As I'm finishing up here, I do want to just let you know this is known as the IML Resi drill. This is a piece of technology we use that looks like we stole it from the 80s, a Ghostbusters movie, perhaps. But what it is a drill. It's a fine drill, super tiny little drill, and it extends to approximately 16 inches. And when we find significant decay with the arbitrum, because the arbitrum is considered non-invasive, um, we will then go check our findings with the resistance drill. So sometimes we go in with the resistance drill, and what it actually does is it goes in through each of the growth rings of the tree and tests the resistance. Well, once you get to decay, it doesn't detect any resistance anymore. So if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see that reflected. The resistance, it was cut off in the picture. The resistance rate is the teal or the green in the lines there. The feed rate is how fast we're putting it in. That's the blue there. And on the bottom, it has color coded for where it's detecting rot and then where it's severe rot. So when it doesn't detect any resistance, it's like just going through nothing at that point. So we've actually been able to see significant decay with the arbitrum. Use a resistance drill, determine that there's maybe 10 or more inches of sound wood before you get to decay, and ultimately decide we're going to wait and watch and see what happens. We're going to keep an eye on the tree. We're not going to make any decisions right now. The resistance drill is showing good numbers all the way around. This is based on the size of the tree, the age and the height and things like that. And a lot of times that's what decision is made there. And the last thing I'm going to discuss before I open this up for questions is this is Arvistop. So this is it's an application that we use. It's developed by RIN Technologies that anyone can actually use. You can have it on your phone, and you can just type in the data that you see visually. You can estimate it and put it in and get a general idea of what we need. However, if you put in exact measurements from your arbitrum and your resistograph, you will get highly accurate recommendations. And what the recommendations are is you type in your strength loss that I mentioned before from your arbitrum. You type in all your numbers so it knows what kind of tree it is, how tall it is, how old it is. And with that data, it will literally give you a prescriptive pruning, essentially. So it will tell you just how much to remove from the canopy to bring your strength loss values up to an acceptable rate, so that you're, instead of being at 30% strength loss on this side, you're now down to 5% strength loss because you have removed that wind load. So now there's not as much to compensate for. As trees age, they will naturally smallen, if you will, their canopy so they can conserve resources. They're not putting out as much energy. Trees do have a maximum height, but what they don't have is a maximum width. So they will continue to put on girth and ultimately compensate for any, strength loss as time goes on. So basically what we're doing is just that. We're mimicking what a tree would naturally do with age by reducing the size of the canopy and therefore increasing its strength and its ability to handle, the wind loads. And this is another way that we can preserve trees instead of just removing them if we're not seeing severe fungal infections and other really severe problems. This is a great way to prune the tree, to give it, some more years and be well loved for much longer. And that is the gist of it. I was trying to keep us within our 45-minute window. And obviously, I'm sure a lot of you have heard this, but the true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. And I love this because I plant a lot of trees, and there are a lot of new trees being planted at Pitt. And while, of course, they don't replace, any of these large trees, one for one, because they just simply can't. But what they are doing is creating that exact same value for our future. We are planting the future canopy, for our children and our grandchildren to enjoy. And hopefully now, with the knowledge we have and the technology we have, giving these trees a much better start in an urban environment than these older trees had when they started. So that's it. Thank you so much for listening.